Hello and welcome, students. This is the discussion of Issues That Matter course. In this lecture, we'll be discussing a poem titled On Killing a Tree, authored by the famous Indian writer Gieve Patel. We shall understand this poem in three parts. First, we shall know more about the author of this poem. Then we'll get into a paragraph-wise textual analysis of the poem. And then we'll conclude the discussion of this poem by analyzing the stylistics of the poem and the language in which the poem is authored. To start with the author introduction, the poem On Killing a Tree, which is the subject of our discussion, is authored by Gieve Patel. He was born in 1940. He is a famous Indian painter, playwright, and poet. He was born in Mumbai and was educated at the Grand Medical College. He is a registered physician and an active man of science. He currently resides in Mumbai and practices medicine there. He is part of a group of writers who have subscribed themselves to the Green Movement, which is involved in an effort to protect the environment. His works afford a significant place to the human body and the workings of the human body. His poems speak of the depth of the issues of human exploitation of nature, and all his poems convey deep concerns for nature and expose man's cruelty to it. Apart from being a practicing doctor, Gieve Patel is a well-known contemporary Indian visual artist and painter. He has taken part in numerous exhibitions that happened around the world. To explore some of his literary contributions, his first poetry collection was titled How Do You Withstand and was published in 1966. His subsequent poetry collections were titled Body, published in 1976, Mirrored Mirroring, published in 1991. His first play was written and performed in 1971, and he has also written two other plays titled Savaksa and Mr. Behram. He has taken part in numerous exhibitions, some of which are the Menton Biennale in France that happened in 1976, the India Myth and Reality exhibition that happened in Oxford in 1982, to name a few. Next, we shall get into a textual analysis of the poem that we have at our interest. We shall have a brief introduction about the poem On Killing a Tree. On Killing a Tree begin the tale of how to kill a tree. From the very title, the purpose of the poem is to elaborate on the procedures with which a tree can be killed. This poem is part of Gieve Patel's anthology, which is titled Poems. This poem is a clinical and step-by-step instruction on how to kill a tree, and it makes us realize that killing a tree is akin or similar to murdering a human being. The poem offers a graphic picture of man's cruelty towards trees and thus towards nature. It refers to the destructive nature of humans and the indestructibility and regenerative capacity of nature. The poet adapts a cold and objective tone, which make us wonder whether the poet is not completely sensible, but in truth and in a deeper analysis of the poem, it is revealed that this objective and cold tone has been employed by the poet to shock its readers into a new perspective of conservation and need to protect the life of trees and nature around humans. The poem is, in a sense, a scathing criticism of the human callousness and cruelty in exploiting the nature in the name of agriculture, urbanization, and development. On a surface level, the poem seems like a how to do manual of killing a tree, but on a deeper analysis, it reveals a passionate appeal not to kill trees but to protect nature. The term killing in the title and throughout the poem is used with the intent to personify the tree. The poet aims to portray the killing of a tree as a murder of a human being. He is enabling the readers to view the trees as vital and an integral part of nature and as occupying the same status as human. Therefore, the chopping off or cutting of a tree is used with the term killing of a tree as it is equated to the death of a human being. We shall get into the poem. We shall briefly read the poem first. It takes much time to kill a tree. Not a simple jab of the knife will do it. It has grown slowly, consuming the earth, rising out of it, feeding upon its crust, absorbing years of sunlight, air, water, and out of its leprous hide, sprouting leaves. So hack and chop, but this alone won't do it. Not so much pain will do it. The bleeding bark will heal, and from close to the ground will rise curled green twigs, miniature boughs, which, if unchecked, will expand again to former size. No, the root is to be pulled out. Out of the anchoring earth, it is to be roped, tied, and pulled out, snapped out or pulled out entirely, out from the earth cave, and the strength of the tree exposed, the source, white and wet, the more sensitive, hidden for years inside the earth, then the matter of scorching and choking in the sun and air, browning, hardening, twisting, withering, and then it is done. At this first reading of the tree, it seems like a clinical and systematic description of the procedure for killing a tree. ഒരു വൃക്ഷത്തെ വെട്ടിയൊതുക്കാൻ അല്ലെങ്കിൽ കൊല്ലുവാൻ വേണ്ട നടപടികളെ കൃത്യമായി സൂചിപ്പിക്കുന്ന രീതിയിലുള്ള ഒരു കവിതയായിട്ടാണ് ആദ്യത്തെ വായനയിൽ നമുക്കിതിനെ മനസ്സിലാക്കാൻ സാധിക്കുന്നത്. നമുക്കിതിനെ പാരഗ്രാഫ് വൈസ് നമുക്ക് മനസ്സിലാക്കാൻ ശ്രമിക്കാം. ഇതിൻ്റെ ആദ്യത്തെ പാരഗ്രാഫ്, ലെറ്റ് മീ റീഡ് ഇറ്റ്. ഇറ്റ് ടേക്സ് മച്ച് ടൈം ടു കിൽ എ ട്രീ. നോട്ട് എ സിമ്പിൾ ജാബ് ഓഫ് ദ നൈഫ് will do it. It has grown slowly, consuming the earth, rising out of it, feeding upon its crust, absorbing years of sunlight, air, water, and out of its leprous hide, sprouting leaves. So the word jab, which is marked in green, means to poke roughly with something sharp. So the process of poking into the tree or onto the bark of the tree is called jabbing. It can be done with a knife or anything sharp. So in the first few sentences, the poet is trying to tell us that killing a tree is a difficult and time-consuming process. ഒരു ചെറിയ കത്തി കൊണ്ട് അല്ലെങ്കിൽ ഒരു കടാര കൊണ്ട് കുത്തി നോവിച്ചാൽ അവസാനിക്കുന്നതല്ല ഒരു വൃക്ഷത്തിൻ്റെ ജീവിതം. അതിനെ ഒരു വൃക്ഷത്തെ കൊല്ലുക എന്നുള്ളത് എളുപ്പമായുള്ള ഒരു സംഗതിയല്ല എന്നാണ് തുടക്കത്തിലെ സെൻറ്റൻസുകളിൽ പോയിട്ട് പറയുന്നത്. The poet goes on to say that a tree grows gradually. It is rooted in the soil from where it takes nutrition to grow into a big tree. It is also supplemented by sunlight, water, air to grow into a strong tree. It might have a strong trunk and have numerous leaves, all grown out of the nutrition from the soil in which it is standing and from the surroundings that provides it with sunlight, water, and air. So this grown tree will have a irregular and scaly bark or external skin, which is referred to as leprous hide here. It is connected to the skin of a leper or a person with leprosy. കുഷ്ഠരോഗം പിടിച്ച ഒരു വ്യക്തിയുടെ ചർമ്മത്തോട് സമമായിട്ടാണ് ഇറഗുലർ ആയിട്ടുള്ള ഒരു വൃക്ഷത്തിൻ്റെ പുറന്തോടിനെ കാണുന്നത് ഇവിടെ. ഒരു ചെടി മരമായി മാറുന്നത് വർഷങ്ങൾ കൊണ്ടുള്ള വളർച്ച കൊണ്ടാണ്. താൻ നിൽക്കുന്ന മണ്ണിൽ നിന്ന് പോഷകം സ്വീകരിച്ച് ചുറ്റുമുള്ള സൂര്യപ്രകാശവും വായുവും ജലവും എല്ലാം ഉപയോഗപ്പെടുത്തിയാണ് ചുക്കിച്ചുളഞ്ഞ മരത്തൊലിയിൽ നിന്ന് ഇലകൾ തളിർക്കുന്നത്. ഇത്തരത്തിലുള്ള ഒരു വലിയ നീണ്ട പ്രോസസ്സിന് ശേഷമാണ് ഒരു വൃക്ഷം ഉണ്ടാവുന്നത്. അതിനെ ചെറിയൊരു കത്തി കൊണ്ട് കുത്തിയാലൊന്നും നോവിക്കാനോ കൊലപാതകപ്പെടുത്താനോ ആവില്ല എന്നാണ് നമ്മളോട് പോയിട്ട് പറയുന്നത്. The term leprous hide is used to signify the discolored and uneven bark of a tree. It is a comparison or a metaphor. To explore the second paragraph of the poem, so hack can chop, but this alone won't do it. Not so much pain will do it. The bleeding bark will heal, and from close to the ground will rise curled green twigs and miniature boughs, which if unchecked will expand again to former size. To hack means to cut roughly by striking heavy blows. Twigs are slender woody shoots that grow out from a branch or a stem of a tree or a shrub, and bough is the main branch of a tree. So this paragraph signifies that hacking or cutting roughly by striking heavy blows or chopping the parts of the trees will not result in the killing of the tree. It is not sufficient to destroy the trees. Hacking with an axe or chopping off a bow or jabbing with a knife, as said in the earlier paragraph, will not cause the death of the tree but only inflict pain. It is not enough to bring the tree down. And this paragraph is utilized to communicate the resilience of nature, the ability of nature and trees to regenerate, unlike that of the point at which the tree is hacked or chopped will have an injury or a cut where the tree sap will ooze out. So the oozing out of the tree sap is compared to blood coming out of a human being's injury. And the poet is going on to say that that point where the tree bleeds, it will also gradually heal, and from there new branches will start growing again. And the usage bleeding bark is again a metaphor where the wound in the bark of a tree from where the sap flows out is compared to that of a wound on a human body from where the blood is coming out. And the poet is actually talking about the regenerative capacity of trees and in general nature, where if we do not take care to destroy it or to continually monitor it, new green twigs will grow, new boughs or new branches will grow out from where the tree is chopped off, and the whole tree will regenerate. This is completely in contrast with the case of human beings. If a hand or a part of the body of a human being is cut off, he or she is incapable of regenerating that part of the body. At the same time, a tree is much resilient to the exploitations of human beings. So by focusing or underlining on this capacity of nature to regenerate, the poet is actually reminding us about our own frailty and our own incompetence in the whole world, and how much we overestimate our capacities, and to what extent we overexploit the much superior beings around us. Now, to go into the third paragraph of the poem, it reads, "No, the root is to be pulled out of the anchoring earth. It is to be robbed, tied, and pulled out, snapped out, or pulled out entirely, out from the earth cave, and the strength of the tree exposed, the source, white and wet, the most sensitive, hidden for years under the earth." Here is a mention of how the tree can actually be killed. So, in order to kill a tree, it has to be uprooted. One has to separate the tree from the earth, which supports and anchors it. So, the anchoring earth is a usage to communicate to how the earth holds, or earth or the soil holds the tree firmly connected to its life, and how the trees are held securely with the help of roots onto the earth. And how can the trees be killed? It is by snapping out or chopping out or pulling out the root, which is the sustaining force that retains the tree onto the ground, by pulling it out onto the surface. This is the way in which the tree can be killed. The poet explains that it is only by exposing the root to the forces of nature that a tree can be killed. The term anchoring earth refers to the secure connection that the tree has with the help of the roots, which grounds it on the earth. So, as long as the root binds the tree with the earth, the tree is safe and it will be alive and it will have a chance to regenerate itself, no matter what blows or stabbing or chopping the human attempts to do on it. And poet explains about the features of the root, or the life giver, or the life sustaining part of the tree. Root is called as described to be in white color and as damp or wet. It is the most essential part of the tree. It is the source of tree's life, and only when it is pulled out of the deep hole of the earth, the tree is really vulnerable. And the usage earth cave is actually the gap or the space that is created in the earth when you attempt to uproot a tree. So, in this process, in this paragraph particularly, the term pulled out is repeated in order to emphasize the importance of the final act of taking the life of the tree away. The poet elaborates on the final blow of death with his last paragraph, where he says, "Then the matter of scorching and choking in the sun and air, browning, hardening, twisting, withering, and then it is done." So, by exposing the root out onto the surface of the earth itself, the tree is vulnerable to death. And the final blow of death is achieved when the root is dried up after being uprooted. Once the tree has been uprooted, then gradually it will wither away, it will dry up with the actions of the heat and the wind, and there will be changes in the structure of the tree, and there will be only a dead body left. So it gradually withers and dries up due to heat and wind, and due to the continuous exposure to sun and air, it will be dehydrated and it will choke. To choke means to be unable to breathe, and in the process of dehydration and inability to sustain life, it will wither and it will become dry and lose its shape and living a dead body or a corpse instead of a tree. In short, the exposure of the roots to the elements of sun and air will ultimately weaken the tree and result in the killing of the tree. This is the brief description or brief textual analysis of the poem that we are studying. To quickly summarize the meaning of the poem, the poet Gieve Patel persuades the reader not to destroy the trees, and he attempts this persuasion by equating the cutting of a tree with the killing of a human being. He says that plants take sunlight, water, air, and nutrients from the soil to gradually become a huge tree, and it develops a strong trunk and have numerous leaves. And he elaborates to us that a mere cutting of the trunk of the tree, or chopping off the parts of the tree, or jabbing with knives, none of these attempts will completely kill a tree. At the same time, in the parts or in the areas where the tree is suffering from a blow or a cut, the sap may flow out just like blood flows out of a wounded man. And however, this wound or this bleeding is ultimately healed, and the tree regenerates with new branches and new leaves. But the poet prescribes the real way to kill a tree, and it is by uprooting it. The roots, which are the life givers, which are white in color and are damp due to the moisture they get from the soil, they are to be exposed to the elements of sunlight and wind. And the more sensitive and the life giving part of the tree, which are the roots, once uprooted and exposed to the elements of nature, will result in the death of the tree. Once the roots are detached, the trees begin to die, and the withering of the root will enable or complete the death of the tree. This is the quick summary of the poem. There are some critical perspectives that you have to understand about the poem. The poem, on the surface, appears to be a clinical description of how to kill a tree, but when you explore the thematic elements that the poet tries to communicate to its reader, we understand that the poet sensitizes the reader and highlights the fact that trees are living things. He equates trees with humans so as to convey that trees should not be cut, because destroying trees is just like killing a human being. This equation that the poet draws enables the reader to rethink the perception of cutting of a tree as a severe crime equivalent to murder of a man. A tree does not die by merely cutting it, because it regrows from where it is cut. And the poet is telling us that the killing of a tree is actually a bizarre and extremely violent action, because the tree itself has capacity to regenerate at all stages of man's exploitation. But it is only an extremely violent action, that is of uprooting the tree itself, where it dies. So the poet highlights the intensity with which men exploit the nature. And tree also represents nature, and the poet communicates the indestructible attitude or capacity of nature and the capacity of regeneration as well. But despite all of this, if man is successful in exploiting nature to a level of deterioration, it means that man's cruelty and callousness is at its height. And Gieve Patel wants his readers to come to a realization, and he uses a sarcastic tone to make us aware of the vulnerability of human lives and how proper care of environment can keep one safe from harm. And humans have wrongly overestimated their own capacity and underestimated nature's capacity to regenerate and rehabilitate itself. So, from the beginning till the end of the poem, the detailed description of the process of killing a tree and the consequences of killing a tree is said and described so as to give a perspective to the reader about the nature's resilience. At the same time, the poet is attempting to highlight man's systemic destruction of the environment, the extent to which man is exploiting the environment for his good. So the title is appropriate to communicate and to equate cutting of trees to killing of men, so as to drive the point to the reader's mind very effectively. ഒരൊറ്റ നോട്ടത്തിൽ ഒരു വൃക്ഷത്തെ എങ്ങനെ കൊലപ്പെടുത്താം എന്നുള്ളത് ഘട്ടം ഘട്ടമായി വിവരിച്ചു തരുന്ന ഒരു വിവരണമായിട്ടാണ് ഈ കവിതയെ നമുക്ക് മനസ്സിലാക്കാനാവുക. പക്ഷേ കുറച്ചുകൂടി വ്യക്തമായി ഈ കവിത വായിച്ച് മനസ്സിലാക്കുമ്പോൾ ഇതിൻ്റെ ആദർശ തലങ്ങളെക്കുറിച്ച് നമുക്ക് മനസ്സിലാവും. കവി ഇവിടെ ഉദ്ദേശിക്കുന്നത് വൃക്ഷങ്ങളെയും പ്രകൃതിയെയും നശിപ്പിക്കരുത് എന്നുള്ള ഒരു അഭ്യർത്ഥന മുന്നോട്ട് വയ്ക്കാനാണ്. ഒരു വൃക്ഷം വെട്ടുന്നത് ഒരു മനുഷ്യനെ കൊല്ലുന്നതിന് സമാനമായിട്ടാണ് ഈ എഴുത്തുകാരൻ മുന്നോട്ട് വയ്ക്കുന്നത്. ഒരു വൃക്ഷം വെട്ടുന്നതിനെ ഒരു മനുഷ്യനെ കൊല്ലുന്നതിനോട് ഉപമിക്കുന്നത് കൊണ്ട് വായനക്കാരൻ്റെ മനസ്സിലേക്ക് ഒരു ബോധ്യം, ഒരു പരിസ്ഥിതി ബോധം നിറഞ്ഞ കാഴ്ചപ്പാട് എന്നിവ ഉണ്ടാക്കിയെടുക്കാനാണ് ഈ കവിത കൊണ്ട് കവി ശ്രമിക്കുന്നത്. ഒരു വൃക്ഷത്തെ കൊല്ലുവാൻ ചെറിയൊരു കത്തി കൊണ്ടുള്ള കുത്തോ കോടാലി കൊണ്ട് ആഞ്ഞു മുറിക്കുന്നതോ പല ഭാഗങ്ങൾ വെട്ടി ഒരുക്കുന്നത് കൊണ്ടോ സാധ്യമല്ല എന്ന് കവി ഓർപ്പിക്കുന്നു. എത്രയൊക്കെ ഉപദ്രവം ചെയ്താലും മുറിഞ്ഞ് വൃക്ഷത്തിൻ്റെ സാപ്പ് അല്ലെങ്കിൽ വൃക്ഷത്തിൻ്റെ ഉള്ളിലെ ചോര ഒഴുകുമെങ്കിലും വൃക്ഷം പൂർണ്ണമായി മരിക്കുകയില്ല നമ്മളെ ഓർമ്മപ്പെടുത്തിക്കൊണ്ട് ഒരു വൃക്ഷത്തെ കൊല്ലണമെങ്കിൽ അതിൻ്റെ ജീവസ്രോതസ്സായ വേര് ഭൂമിയിൽ നിന്ന് വലിച്ച് പുറത്തേക്കിട്ട് അത് വെയിലും കാറ്റും ഒക്കെ കൊണ്ട് ഉണങ്ങി വരണ്ട് നശിക്കുമ്പോൾ മാത്രമേ ഒരു വൃക്ഷം മരിക്കുകയുള്ളൂ എന്ന് നമുക്ക് പറഞ്ഞു തരികയാണ്. ഒരു പക്ഷേ പ്രകൃതിയുടെയും വൃക്ഷങ്ങളുടെയും പുനരുജ്ജീവന ശക്തി നമ്മളെ ഓർമ്മപ്പെടുത്തിക്കൊണ്ട് അതേസമയം ഒരു വൃക്ഷത്തെ നശിപ്പിക്കുക അല്ലെങ്കിൽ കൊല്ലുക എന്നുള്ളത് വളരെ ഭീതിജനകമായ, അങ്ങേയറ്റം വയലൻ്റ് ആയിട്ടുള്ള ഒരു പ്രക്രിയയിലൂടെ മാത്രമേ നടക്കുകയുള്ളൂ എന്ന് നമ്മളോട് പറഞ്ഞു തരികയും ചെയ്യുകയാണ് നമ്മുടെ എഴുത്തുകാരൻ. We shall conclude our discussion of this poem by analyzing the stylistics of the poem. The language used in the poem is very simple. It's remarkable and it's vividly portraying the images that the poet wants to convey to its readers. The words have an evocative power. They're suggestive. The expressions like bleeding bark, leprous hide, anchoring earth, they bring strong visual imageries into the reader's mind. And the poem captures man's callousness in killing trees and in destroying the nature. And the poem describes the whole process of the murder of a tree with a clinical tone which is intended to sarcastically shock the reader into realizing the man's wrong underestimation of nature's role in his life. And the whole poem can be viewed as a telling commentary of one of the major environmental issues that encounters. ഈ കവിതയിൽ ഉപയോഗിച്ചിരിക്കുന്ന ഭാഷ വളരെ ലളിതവും വളരെ സുത്യർഹവുമാണ്. മനുഷ്യൻ്റെ പ്രകൃതിയെ നോവിക്കുന്നതിലും പ്രകൃതിയെ ദുരുപയോഗം ചെയ്യുന്നതിലും ഉള്ള കഠിനഹൃദയമായ മനോഭാവം നമ്മളുടെ മനസ്സിലേക്ക് വരുത്തുന്ന രീതിയിലാണ് ഓരോ വാക്കും ഈ കവിതയിൽ ഉപയോഗിച്ചിരിക്കുന്നത്. ബ്ലീഡിംഗ് ബാക്ക്, ലെപ്പറസ് ഹൈഡ്, ആങ്കറിങ് എർത്ത് തുടങ്ങിയ പ്രയോഗങ്ങൾ കൊണ്ട് കൃത്യമായ ഒരു വൃക്ഷത്തിൻ്റെ പല പല നേർചിത്രങ്ങൾ വായനക്കാരുടെ മനസ്സിലേക്ക് നേരിട്ടെത്തിക്കുന്ന രീതിയിലാണ് ഈ കവിത എഴുതപ്പെട്ടിരിക്കുന്നത്. ഈ കവിതയുടെ നിർവികാരത നിറഞ്ഞ ഭാവം ഒരു രൂക്ഷ പരിഹാസമാണ്. മനുഷ്യൻ പ്രകൃതിയുടെ ആവശ്യകത മനസ്സിലാക്കാതെ അതിനെ ദുരുപയോഗം ചെയ്ത് നശിപ്പിക്കുന്നതിനെ നമ്മളെ ഓരോരുത്തരെയും ഓർപ്പിക്കുന്ന ഒരു പരിഹാസ ചൊവ്വയാണ് ഈ കവിതയിൽ ഇത്രയും നിർവികാരമായ രീതിയിൽ ഒരു വൃക്ഷത്തെ എങ്ങനെ കൊല്ലുന്നത് എന്നത് വിവരിച്ചു തന്നതുകൊണ്ട് കവി ഉദ്ദേശിക്കുന്നത്. മനുഷ്യൻ ഇന്ന് നേരിടുന്ന ഏറ്റവും വലിയ ഒരു എൻവയോൺമെൻറ്റൽ സ്ട്രഗിളിൻ്റെ നേർചിത്രമാണ് ഈ കവിതയിലൂടെ ഈ കവി നമ്മൾക്ക് മനസ്സിലാക്കി തരാൻ ഉദ്ദേശിക്കുന്നത്. Now we will explore the literary devices that is present in the poem. We had already discussed metaphors that are present in the poem. Metaphor is an indirect comparison, and two examples of metaphors within the poem is leprous hide and bleeding bark. The term leprous hide is utilized to signify the bark of the trees, which are unevenly colored, and this unevenly colored surface of the trunk of the tree is compared to the skin of a person suffering from leprosy. Another usage is bleeding bark. The sap coming out of the tree where it has suffered a cut or an injury is compared to the bleeding from a wound in a human's body. These are the two metaphors that are present in the poem. The next literary device that is applied is alliteration. Alliteration is repetition of consonant sounds in two or more closely placed words. Few examples of alliterations are the bleeding bark and white and wet. So in bleeding bark, the sound b is repeated in adjacent words. And similarly, in the usage white and wet, the sound w is repeated in adjacent words. And the third literary device that is utilized is repetition. This is a word or a sentence that is repeated to lay emphasis on it. So here, the term pulled out is repeated, especially in the third paragraph, to emphasize the importance of the action or the final act by which a tree is killed, that is pulling out the root out of its sanctuary of soil. So few other literary devices that are utilized is enjambment, as you can see in the first paragraph and in some of the paragraphs in the poem. Enjambment is understood as a literary device where one sentence continues into two or more lines of a poem. Not a simple jab of the knife will do it. It has grown slowly, consuming the earth, rising out of it, feeding upon its crest, absorbing years of sunlight, air, and water, and out of its leprous hide sprouting leaves. This entire paragraph can be understood as one sentence. So this stretching out or spreading out of one sentence into many lines of a poem is known as enjambment. And the next literary device is personification. As you know, personification is attributing human qualities or character or personality to inanimate or non-human things or beings. So here, as you know, throughout the poem, the tree is portrayed as a human being whose cut or injury is compared to that of a bleeding wound of a human being. A tree who is regenerating from its life, even though its life is attempted to be robbed. So this tree is portrayed as a human being throughout this poem, and also a special reference to the bleeding bark is the comparison of a wound bleeding from a human body to the sap coming out of a cut bark of a tree. This enables us to identify the personification in the poem. The last one is the rhyme scheme. The poem do not have any particular rhyme scheme, and a poem with no rhyme scheme or rhythm is known as free verse. And now we shall discuss the question answers of the poem. The first question, this is a small discussion on the short answer questions in your text. The first question is the poet really trying to teach us to kill a tree? So, even though the poem seems like a clinical description of the procedures of killing a tree, it is actually an attempt to sensitize the readers, and the poem is highlighting the fact that trees are living beings too. So, by personifying a tree, the poet communicates that cutting off a tree is equivalent to killing off a human. So, this equation allows the readers to think that cutting off a tree is as grave a crime as killing off a human, thus preventing one from cutting or destructing trees and environment. So, the poet is not really telling us or teaching us how to kill a tree. So, that is the answer. The second question is, how has the tree grown into its present status? The tree has grown by consuming nutrients from the earth. It has absorbed sunlight, air, and water from its surrounding nature. So the poet describes the process in which the tree, by consuming the nutrients from the earth and rising out of the earth and feeding upon the provisions of the earth and absorbing years of sunlight, air, and water, grows into its present status. The third question is, what does the poet mean by no at the beginning of the third stanza? No is standing right in the beginning of the third stanza as a singular sentence in the poem. It signifies that the poet is refusing the possibility of a tree being killed by cutting or jabbing or even chopping of the trunk. The no stands as an introduction to the final procedure with which the tree can be killed, that is, by pulling out the root of the tree from the sanctuary of the soil. The fourth question is a repetition. What is the meaning of anchoring earth and earth cave? So, anchoring earth means that the earth supports the tree firmly, and earth cave is the pit in the earth which will be left when the roots are uprooted or the roots of the tree is pushed out from the earth. And the last question is, why does the poet call the roots the strength of the tree? The root is the most sensitive and important part of the tree, the life giving aspect of the tree that binds it to the soil and earth. So it is only through the process of exposing the roots that the tree is finally killed. Thus, the poet calls roots the strength of the tree. So we shall conclude our discussion on Gieve Patel's poem on killing the tree. I hope you have understood the poem clearly. Thank you all. Keep learning.